Well, good evening. I'm at the bungalow. My name is Mike Phillipson. We're going to have a speaker tonight on gun rights. I imagine it's going to be quite interesting.
You're the official recorder of the meeting?
Yeah. This goes on Access TV.
Access
Yeah, Manistee.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Bob Sealish, and on behalf of the Manistee Tea Party, welcome everyone here tonight. We will begin the evening with a prayer. Almighty God, who has given us this good land for our heritage, we humbly entreat you that we may always prove ourselves a people mindful of your favor and glad to do your will. Bless our land with honorable industry and sound learning. Defend our liberties and protect our Constitution. Empower with the spirit of wisdom those of whom, in your name, we entrust the authority of government, that there may be justice and peace at home, and that, through obedience to your law, we may show forth your praise among the nations of the earth. In times of prosperity, fill our hearts with thankfulness, and in the day of trouble, do not allow our trust in you to fail. All of which we ask through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the United States of
America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, a couple of announcements before we get started. I'll talk about our May meeting next month. Next month we are going to have Diane, I probably didn't say this right, Schindleback, come and speak to us. Diane is the founder of the West Michigan Republicans, and she is co-chair of the Michigan Trump Republicans. She is one of the group last year that, the year before that, became an organizer for the Trump campaign, which is obviously where the Michigan Trump Republicans came from. She represents Western Michigan. I spoke to her Monday to finalize everything, and she was down in Florida with a group. She, under the West Michigan, under the Michigan Trump Republicans, that was founded in January of 2007, and it was meant to support Trump during his presidency. And they've been very active. She's the one, their group that organized the Grand Rapids rally. A couple weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago, that was her group that organized that rally. Anyhow, she was down there with other states. They morphed into the Michigan Trump Republicans, the same organization. They just kind of split off and sort of last year formed the Women for Trump group. It's the same people. So she's runs that group. But they were down in Florida, and they're starting to organize Women for Trump around the country. That was the purpose of that meeting. I think it'll be a very interesting speaker. And she has agreed to come visit us next month. July, we haven't got a program quite finalized yet, so I'll give let everyone know when that's done. And just mention in July, we have our annual picnic, and we have Representative Jack O'Malley will be here to speak. Okay, tonight, we have a return guest, Suzanne Anglewitz. It's hard to believe, we were just talking, it's been 4 years since she was here. It doesn't seem like it could possibly be 4 years, but it has been. She currently works as a senior Midwest field coordinator for the NRA's Institute for Legislative Action, covering Michigan, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. She previously served as grassroots manager of political and legislative activities and research attorney for the NRA IRL. Currently, she works to develop and strengthen the NRA's political and legislative activities at the state and federal levels. In addition, she oversees state and federal campaign field operations in her assigned states and represents the association at various public and educational forums nationwide. She attended Michigan State University, a very excellent choice for colleges. Go Spartans. Earning a bachelor's degree in political theory and constitutional democracy. She has also received a JD from Western Michigan University, Cooley Law School. Suzanne is an NRA instructor, avid hunter, and a lifetime member of the NRA, and she has been with the NRA since 2005. With that, let's welcome Suzanne.
Good evening, everybody. It's great to be back. This is one of my favorite parts of the state. I grew up in Rochester, so down the Metro Detroit area, but this is my favorite part of the state, and I'm always happy to be back in Michigan, of course. Again, I work for the NRA ILA. The ILA is the Institute for Legislative Action. It's the political, legislative, lobbying, legal arm of the NRA. NRA is a pretty large organization, but we have different divisions. Part of it is because the law compels it to be that way, but that's the focus for us, is legislative, political, lobbying, and legal. What I thought I would do tonight is give you a little bit of an update on federal legislation, state legislation. It's certainly an interesting time for the Second Amendment in our country, so I thought I'd give an update on that as well as a legal update. One thing that, at least for me, being with NRA for over 13 years now, is I've seen a huge shift in a lot of the battles being fought in the courts. And a lot of folks aren't as aware of that because they're usually kind of looking to legislation. So I kind of want to give a quick legal update. And then, of course, talk about some of our grassroots programs and our plan. Obviously, we are already mobilizing for 2020. We know it's going to be an epic election year, similar to what we went through. Well, we were part of it in 18, 16, but the NRA is always kind of right in the middle. So I'll talk a little bit about some of our efforts and what NRA does during an election year. And then, of course, take any questions that you have. I figure I'd rather kind of talk about what you want to hear about. There's a lot going on. So I'll start with the federal side. We've recently had our first gun control hearings in Congress that we've had in over 20 years. And I think people don't realize that it's been that long. And it's been interesting to watch because, to be quite honest, I think the hearings that we're seeing and the discussions that they're having with the House, the anti-gun House, Democrats, it's really nothing more than a victory lap by them. You know, they're trying to score political points ahead of 2020. So there are certain political realities, I think, that we have to be honest about as far as split legislatures, both federal and here in Michigan, and about what's actually going to move, what do we need to be focused on. We want to kind of stay laser focused on certain things. But starting with the federal side, we have the universal background check bill hearing, and that was a big one because, again, the first hearings we've had on Capitol Hill on gun control in over 20 years. And like I said, the political reality of that bill was it wasn't going to make it anywhere in the Senate, at least for now, and the White House, of course, indicates they wouldn't sign any of those bills. But I think it's important to talk about this bill because these issues are not going to go away. We may say, we're good in the Senate, nothing's going to happen. But I think for us, as part of the pro-gun community, I think it's really important that we're good stewards of the Second Amendment. And I think that means that even if a bill isn't going to move, I think we still have to talk about the educational side of it. What I've learned mostly in this issue is that, we're the good guys, and if people understood truly what we were talking about, I have to believe they would agree with us. And so a lot of the things people are talking about, they don't fully understand the terms when they hear the term assault weapon or universal background check. So starting with the universal background check bill, this bill would essentially do nothing more than criminalize just transfers between families, your hunting buddy, and just make criminals out of everyday citizens with their firearms. It's an unfortunate thing because from the educational point of view, when you talk to people, they're like, but it's a reasonable gun control restriction. And that's become kind of the most dangerous term in the fight, is reasonable restrictions. So we really need to have conversations about what does it mean, because a lot of folks, when I talk to them about this issue, they're under the impression that we don't have any type of background check system. They don't understand that we actually already have one. It's a failure and it needs attention. But the reality is this, is that criminals by nature are not going to follow the law. We know that criminals get their guns through unregulated channels. But here we are in a country that has some pretty serious issues. We really need to start having open, honest, and uncomfortable discussions about what we're dealing with. But here we are. I can't go hunting with someone and loan them my firearm on a hunting trip, or I could become a criminal. I can't take my mom to the range and let her use my firearm. I can't sell a firearm to my brother without going through all of these hoops of the federal law. And so we have to be very specific about solutions, and this is not one of them. I think most shocking, though, is what I want to bring up, is that the anti-gun folks have actually admitted to us that these types of bills, this law, is not about public safety. It's not about putting people in jail. They literally said it is about creating a culture of compliance. Now, anytime you hear your government is trying to create a culture of compliance, your constitutional tummies start churning a bit, because that means you must comply without questioning that your government has created a law and you must follow and not wonder why. And that's a dangerous slope. And I think what they're trying to do with this is get gun owners to become slowly acclimated to small changes, little by little, and take little by little until we become comfortable with this. And again, it was William Rosen, he's an attorney for Everytown, which is Mayor Bloomberg's group. He was testifying in a hearing in Nevada on a universal background check bill, and he said, this isn't about putting people in jail. This is about creating a culture of compliance. And he literally said that. And so we know they don't care about public safety. They want people to essentially not have their firearms. And so this is a very dangerous thing because, again, we don't see it moving in the Senate, but people don't understand how dangerous this is when you start down this road. And so the bill did pass the House. We knew that was coming. During the markup, which is a period of time where you can use amendments or corrections to the bill, not a single one offered by a Republican was adopted. Even just the most minute ones that were corrections to the language, not a single one. It was literally a circus to parade gun control that it once again would literally not make a single person safer. And we have a challenge in our country. We need to start thinking about how do we keep guns out of people's hands who are prohibited from having them. We need to start having these conversations, but this is the wrong conversation. So that bill did pass. We don't anticipate it seeing anything in the Senate, but again, it's a good educational point. As is the assault weapon ban of 2019. This is something that gets reintroduced over and over and over again. Of course, it doesn't have legs to move anywhere. But I also think it's really important, even within the program community, to continually talk about the actuality of semi-automatic firearms, and that the term assault weapon is a made-up political term. Even some folks, I do a lot of hunting, I run in hunting circles, and a lot of folks, the AR-15s, and nobody knows how these firearms work. They don't know how versatile and wonderful they are for so many purposes, including hunting. And so even just having conversations about demystifying a firearm, because people don't realize how dangerous it is when you start banning anything in the United States. This is not the country that you just decided that Americans can and cannot have something, or that why do you need that? Well, that's not the right question to ask in the United States of America. Why do you need something? So I think even with the assault weapon ban being reintroduced and of course not going anywhere, I think it's still an important conversation to keep having, because it will continue to be brought up. And let's be honest, We don't know where we're going to be politically in 2 years, in 4 years, in 6 years, in 8 years. We don't know what the president will look like, what the Congress will look like. And so the best thing we can do right now is really talk about some of these efforts and these gun control measures. On the sort of pro side, again, with not having the support of the House, we have, there is reintroduction of what you probably know as the National Right to Carry Reciprocity Act or Constitutional Reciprocity. And this is essentially something the NRA has been working on for 30 years. We just believe that you don't check your right to self-defense the minute you leave a state line into another state. And we've worked very hard as an organization to get all 50 states to have some sort of recognition of a permit to carry, but there are other parts of the country that it is a significant problem when you have a firearm and you're carrying and you're traveling, and it's a patchwork of laws, and you've got good, honest, and as gun owners, we want to be law-abiding. We may not agree with the laws, but we're law-abiding folks that we will jump through the hoops and go through all of this because that's what we have to do. But they can make us a criminal quickly only because we want to be law-abiding, but the laws are so difficult to understand. And so that bill has been reintroduced. We're frustrated it hasn't gone anywhere in the time that we've been running this bill, and we'll continue to be frustrated, to be quite honest, with all sides of the political spectrum. It's not just one or the other on that one. We continue to support deregulated suppressors out of the National Firearms Act of 1934, which is the Hearing Protection Act, something that we'll continue to educate folks on and how that works. A lot of people don't understand. Their only concept of a suppressor is a silencer of a bad guy in a movie. So that's also a very big educational effort for us. Also on the federal side, we have, which is pretty fascinating to me, is the Freedom Financing Act. If you followed NRA and anything we've talked about for, throughout the entire Obama administration, is there is a systematic discriminatory effort to shut down people who do business in the firearms industry. And that affects all of us who purchase firearms and ammunition and so forth. It started with Operation Choke Point during the Obama administration. And essentially, they're using federal regulators to essentially discriminate against people that were using banks and payment processing centers to process firearm purchases. And the federal regulators were trying to shut them down, essentially to choke them out from doing business because they don't agree with selling a firearm. So imagine the livelihood of people who are just running gun shops and all these different businesses. And also for us, you have this credit card, but this credit card's bank doesn't allow you, they won't process your payment for a firearm because they don't like what you're about to purchase. I mean, imagine applying that to anything else in the country. So the NRA railed, obviously, against the Obama administration. We called for hearings, and we basically talked about it every day until it got the attention it deserved. Luckily, part of that sort of went away. However, in place of Operation Choke Point, the anti-gun folks, who are very, very well funded, with the help of Michael Bloomberg, who has more money, makes more money in a day than we'll see in our lifetime, and has pledged millions upon millions of dollars, anything needed to fight the NRA. So what they've done now is they've gone directly to the banks, to the credit cards, the credit unions, and basically shamed them and said, you should not allow people with these cards to purchase firearms or anything within the firearm industry. So they've gone directly to them to have this sort of this moral, turpitude in order to actually allow someone to use your credit card to buy a gun or ammunition. It got so bad that when the president, I believe it was Wells Fargo, testified in Congress, during a hearing on it, they actually said to him that he was part to blame for one of the most recent mass shootings because somebody had used a Wells Fargo account to pay for a firearm. Just last week, there was in the House, there was a hearing on banking, basically about where we've been since the recession and the status of the global economy. And would you believe that hearing turned to a gun control hearing to shame the members, that the heads of the biggest banks in America, they used that opportunity to shame the heads of banks when they were there to talk about global security and economy, and instead tried to shame them because some people who have their accounts use them to purchase firearms. So this particular piece of legislation was introduced in the Senate. It's called the Freedom Financing Act, and essentially it would just say that the federal regulators cannot treat the firearms industry any differently than they do other industries, just because they don't like the product. And so that's a really important one. I know it's not as, I guess, well, as much talked about, but it is a really important piece of legislation that, of course, the NRA is behind, and as it kind of moves, it's the first time we've actually, I think we've had to get a grassroots effort behind a piece of legislation like that, but as you can imagine, very, very important. So from the federal side, those are a couple things. Of course, there are others, so I'll kind of see if you have any questions about them, but those are kind of the big ones that tend to come up most often for me on the federal side. So I'll do federal questions before I move into the state, if you like. So yeah.
I'd like to know what the status of that bill is right now.
It was introduced in the Senate, and this was actually only about 2 weeks ago. So that bill was introduced in the Senate, and nothing's happened yet. Like I said, just very, very recently introduced. On our website, nraila.org, if you go to that website, all of our fact sheets and talking points and articles on this legislation and anything else is listed on that website. So as it moves or gets co-sponsors and so forth, it moves, we'll be posting updates to it. So, but again, just very recently introduced. So, any questions about the federal stuff before I move into the state? Okay. Oh, sure.
Okay. Some of the things you talked about, you know, the NRA somehow has got to educate not only, say, the Democrats, but a lot of the Republicans also are stone dumb on weapons, how they use them, and so on. You know, also, well, that's one of my main things, because when you watch Fox and they got any kind of anti-gun guy, the narrator of whatever program it is, have no idea on the guns.
That's a really important point, and again, even within the own community that you assume is pro-gun, you would be shocked how many folks who are legislators who are responsible for making important decisions don't understand, the Republicans included, and that is evidenced by the fact that we had a seemingly pro-gun full Congress and House and Senate and a pro-gun president, and right to carry reciprocity didn't move. So that is a really important grassroots point, because that means that just because your guy, you think, oh, he's a Republican, he'll vote in line with it. He may, but you need to talk to them to make sure they understand, because their job is also to talk to their fellow members as well. And as we've seen that happen here in Michigan, we've had people that we've supported that had an A rating, and they voted in the middle, just flipped, and voted in favor of universal background checks. So
They don't give a damn what you tell them.
So, well, right, and it comes up to the point where the constituents need to make a point about that.
Our rep does not give a damn what we tell them.
Well, and we have the power to get that out, and I can tell you that there is, I'll just say, Congressman Upton was one of the people who voted in favor of universal background checks, and he's somebody who the NRA had supported for a very long time. So I know that looking at the list of, and again, I don't know how much to rely on it because it's early, but there was a list of some of the targeted races, and that is one of them, so, yeah.
I know that rat when he started, the Republican Party down in Elliott. The poor little rich kid.
Yeah, so.
He is no good.
So we have to hold their feet to the fire. And one thing, well, and I'll tell you what, one thing about NRA members is that we're passionate about this issue. A lot of us are single issue voters, and we hold their feet to the fire. And I'll tell you, we aren't going to let people forget how we voted on that. And our folks, their memories are long. So I encourage folks to use that as an important grassroots point. So.
We have another question here.
This week, I think it was, might have been last week, some lady went from Virginia, something like that, to Colorado and she bought a shotgun. She's going to shoot people. Now, is this going to give
the anti-gun people fodder to ban shotguns and everything else?
Well, listen, they'll use anything, any opportunity, especially an unfortunate, very unfortunate issue like that, or an incident, to do that. I haven't heard anything like that. I think over time, they've been very focused on the so-called assault weapons, I think mainly because of how they look, not how they function.
But they sound good too.
So,
They sound
and it does, when you come up with a term like assault weapon, I mean, this is my assault, binder, this is my assault microphone, I can probably knock someone out with this. But the reality is that they often exploit and capitalize on certain things, and we're always prepared to fight that attack. But like I said, I don't put anything past them, because half of the baseless efforts of gun control that they put out wouldn't keep a single person safe. And that's kind of where we're at. I think as gun owners and supporters of the Second Amendment, I think we all agree that we need to start having conversations about what do we need to do as a nation to keep us safer, to reduce gun violence, to make sure people who are adjudicated mentally ill do not have access to firearms, people who are felons. I mean, we need to start having conversations. Suicide is incredible. 60% of all gun deaths in this country are suicides. And here we are talking about universal background checks. That's not going to stop suicides. It's not going to stop the gang mutual combat violence in our cities. So we're having long conversations, and so we want to keep people focused on solutions. So
It seems what I'm seeing from the states around the country, they're passing new legislation that seems to me is clearly unconstitutional. That seems to be becoming a bigger problem where they are just passing laws and the expectation, I guess, that they're going to work their way up and they just don't care.
that is an incredible observation, because that's exactly what's happening. And so a couple things at the state level, so I don't make the transition into the state, is that what's sort of happened, and they've said, is the gun control folks, again, have become incredibly well-funded over the past, I'd say, 7 or 8 years. They've become much more savvy than they were before. I hate to admit they've become more organized. It used to be laughable, but we've got a fight on our hands now. In some cases, what they will say is, so NRA has worked very hard to put laws in place to protect gun owners at the state level. What some of these cities and towns, municipalities and so forth are doing is, you know what, we don't like that law, NRA, so we're not going to abide by it, and we're going to do whatever we want. Go ahead and sue us, because this is their thought. We're a nonprofit. We're not a corporate entity. We make our bread and butter on $35 from a person or a $20 donation. Michael Bloomberg is putting in, tens of millions of dollars every year. And they're basically saying, take us to court, because it's going to cost you $250,000 just to go to court, and we may lose, but let's go to court and battle it out, because NRA, you're a nonprofit, so you have fun getting that money and wasting it. What they see is wasting it in the courts, rather than fighting it in the legislature. So we are having a significant issue in the court battle. So here in Michigan, we've had that issue with preemption. So preemption laws are something that the NRA really focused on for a good 20-year period. It's because what was happening, especially in places like Michigan, where you have townships, everything's a township, right? It's not like it anywhere else in the country. And it drives our lobbyists crazy that we have all these township ordinances. But what was really important in Michigan and other states is firearm preemption, meaning that a town, city, township, municipality, county cannot make any firearm law more strict than what the state law already is. Well, some of them are like, I don't like that, I'm going to do it anyway, take me to court. And they tie us up in court for quite a while. It's very expensive to do so, and they're doing it all over the place. They're also introducing laws that are clearly unconstitutional. Red flag laws, have you heard of those? Oh my goodness, if that doesn't shake you to the core to say that due process doesn't matter, due process is a cornerstone of this country. And when you have no reverence or respect for it, everything else is out the window. And what they're basically saying is that, you know what, we can take your guns away without due process. Now, there's an important conversation to be had about people who are immediate threats to themselves or others. But to say we're going to go in someone's house, take their guns without due process, And that's it. One, again, unconstitutional, but also dangerous. Why are you leaving the person behind? You're going in, you're taking the guns, and you're leaving, and that's the end of the story. What about the person that you've just now said is mentally incompetent, and you're going to do nothing to keep anybody safe? So again, it's one, unconstitutional, but two, does nothing to keep anybody safe, and we need to start having those conversations no matter how uncomfortable they are. And so we've fought those now in over 17 states. We haven't supported a single one. There is one introduced at the federal level, but we have, it's Rubio's bill. We do not support that bill as it's written. They do not have due process protections in them, and they don't protect the Second Amendment. So states are kind of doing whatever they want. And I think some of that is, over the past, very long period of time, there's not been an opportunity for federal gun control. So they filtered a lot of money into the states. So our fight at the state level has been pretty intense. Here in Michigan, with the current state, with the governor, I don't know, nothing's really going to happen. And I think there's a lot of really nervous members of the Michigan legislature about what's going to happen in 2020. So I don't know that leadership is willing to take up anything pro-gun. In Michigan, they have introduced permitless carry. They have introduced repealing gun-free zones. One bill that might have a chance, I was talking with our state director for Michigan, and right now, currently in Michigan, if you have a CPL and you're carrying with an expired CPL, it's a felony, which is bizarre compared to the surrounding states. So it would be a CPL reform bill that would make it a civil infraction, and of course you have to renew your CPL within a certain amount of time. And that might be something Governor Whitmer might be willing to sign. So we are going to focus on, as much pro-gun stuff as we can. We'd love to get people to vote on them to see where people stand, but I don't know that the leadership will necessarily run with any of those bills. But that's kind of where we're at with Michigan, not too much going on.
Does the Senate help you out at all with information in regards to the NRA?
I haven't worked with them. I thought, for the most part, they do a lot of economic, I think free enterprise stuff, not necessarily Second Amendment stuff. I know some of those folks, they're great folks, they do great research, but I've not had the occasion to kind of interface with them on any of our issues with the nexus there. So.
I didn't think so. There's a question right here.
Sure.
When those local city, county, township officials pass unconstitutional laws, they are in fact violating their oath of office. Is there a reason the ILA couldn't sue or have them prosecuted for violating their oath of office?
Well, a couple things. We have sued. We've actually gone after and sued certain municipalities for doing that. The limit to what we can sue and get back would depend on how the law is written. So a lot of folks have certain immunities as officials, so we can't sue them in a personal capacity. However, one thing the NRA has done is once we kind of passed preemption laws, we realized that some of these folks just didn't care. And so we went back and what we kind of call, we put some teeth into it. So what we did there is we went back to revisit preemption laws, and we actually put in certain damages and penalties that if they went to court, if we sued them and we went to court and they lost, they had to pay not only all of our lawyers' fees, filing fees, but and they could be pretty significant. One of the best moments of my life was being an NRA when a check came in, signed for, I think it was $1.2 million, signed by Ron Emanuel from the city of Chicago. We actually received 2 checks from the city of Chicago because there were certain clauses in the law that allowed that you can't go after that person in their personal capacity, but if they were to abridge that law and we were to sue them and they were to lose, they had to pay us all the money, because again, we're a nonprofit, we don't have unlimited funds. So we have, on many occasions, received pretty sizable amounts of money from certain jurisdictions. And again, my favorite was seeing a check literally signed by Ron Emanuel. So.
Speaking of money, the NRA lost $40 million last year.
It's interesting, yeah. So I think what people do, there's so much misinformation out there. So I think what folks need to know about NRA is the way the IRS compels things. You have the NRA, you have the NRA ILA, and then you have the NRA Political Victory Fund, and then you have the NRA Foundation. So we have all these different, because the IRS, for example, I cannot go to, who goes to, anyone know about Friends of NRA dinners? You guys aware of those? They're fundraising foundation. I cannot go to those and talk about anything political, because they, or anything, about legislation or anything, because the IRS doesn't allow them to talk about politics. And so, and for example, the ILA, my salary is not paid by membership dues. It's literally, essentially, a particular separate budget of mostly donations for political purposes, because I can't spend member money on politics. So I think when they say that, and I've never seen, I know people have said that, and coming from headquarters, nobody's really confirmed where that number came from or how that came up, but I don't even know which area of NRA they're actually talking about, so.
Well, what I read was that the NRA about 25, 30 years ago hired a PR firm to straighten out their image and to make it so that they're less controversial, I guess. And they've become more mainstream American over the last 25, 30 years than they have been initially. They were kind of like a small sect at one time, but now they're quite popular, they're quite up front.
Well, I know the lawsuit is by acronym McQueen. I don't have any information on that, but I can tell you very specifically that that particular thing is about NRA TV, which is a completely other subset. So we have an entire separate, it's called NRA TV, which is not part of the NRA organization or NRA ILA or the NRA Foundation. And so I think we have to be very careful with media stories, because most of the media stories don't even understand how NRA is actually set up. But that particular lawsuit will deal with NRA TV alone, so maybe that's what they're talking about.
Do you have any idea how many people are employed by the NRA?
I can tell you that at headquarters, I'd say it's roughly 600 people are employed by the NRA.
Is that in one spot, or is that spread out throughout the country?
I would say these are the last reports that I know of. There were roughly 500 at headquarters, and then there's over 100 nationwide. But I can tell you, though, a new model for NRA, and that includes myself, is that it makes more sense as a national organization that we're not constantly traveling from DC to Michigan, DC to Minnesota. So we're all kind of becoming regionally based to better cover. So we have a lot more employees now in the field than we do that we're hiring into headquarters. But I'd say 600 might be a pretty close number to be employees. Now, it does not include contractors or contract employees or interns or anything like that.
What's your story as how you became a regional
Well,
person?
So my story is, well, I was at Michigan State University, and while I was at Michigan State, I was interning at the Senate. I was very involved in politics. I was a college Republican and all that good stuff, and I was really interested in politics, in Michigan politics. I ran campaigns at a pretty young age. I think I was 21 the first time I ran a state house campaign with a friend of mine, actually. We were pretty young, and I really got the bug for politics. And from there, I studied political theory, constitutional democracy. I'm a history nerd, and just really appreciated the Constitution, really. And it started with my appreciation for history. From there, I decided to go to law school. So after interning and working, I worked for the Michigan Republican State Committee for a short time on the grassroots side, and so I did a lot of political stuff, but decided I wanted to get a little more cerebral in the policy, so I went to law school. When I was in law school, there was a class, would you believe, it was on a Friday, and it was firearms and the Second Amendment. And I thought, oh, this ought to be interesting. It's probably going to be some anti-gun professor, and I'm going to go in there, all tough. So it was a Friday night class, and I thought this should be interesting. I remember walking into the class, there were only about 7 of us, and in walks this woman, and I thought, oh, okay, that's cool, expecting fully for this to be an anti-gun type of event or class. And she walks in and says, if you think this is going to be an anti-gun class, I'm going to tell you right now you're wrong. She was a professor who was actually serving on the board of directors for the NRA. And so one of our first classes, we went shooting. And so I learned a lot. From there, I actually wanted to get a job job as an intern for the Michigan Coalition of Responsible Gun Owners. And it just kind of went from there. I graduated from law school and had the opportunity to go clerk for one of the best Supreme Court appellate attorneys in Second Amendment, Stephen Holbrook. He's written many books on the Second Amendment. He's argued cases before the Supreme Court. I did my clerkship with Stephen Holbrook in the DC area, and it just, my passion just grew and grew and grew. So I had so many great opportunities. It all started in Michigan. And when I was in law school, right to carry was just being reformed. So it was a really interesting time to be a law student when Michigan right to carry was going from may issue to shall issue. So I could go on and on, but thanks to Michigan, this is where it all kind of started for me. It got me to DC and worked in politics and law there.
Yeah, I have a very interesting question.
Okay.
With Michigan, with our new recreational marijuana and with medical cards, my understanding is that's a back door, that if you use marijuana, that you, or have a medical card, you cannot buy a firearm or legally purchase even ammunition.
Well, so here's where we are. This is a very interesting, intricate, complex legal area. The reality is this, is in the state of Michigan, you can get a medicinal marijuana card and you can recreationally use. However, the federal government, the federal law in no capacity recognizes marijuana to be legal anywhere. So when you go to purchase a firearm and you're filling out a federal form, 4473, it's federal law. They do not care about Michigan law. So if you fill out that form and it asks you, do you use marijuana? And you're like, yeah, I got my card. The person selling you that firearm is going by the federal law because that's a federal form. And so there is an incredible gap and inconsistency in federal law and the state law. We're of the mindset at some point, someone's going to have to, whether it's the ATF is going to have to address this because it's becoming more widespread. But yes, as of now, the laws are incompatible and the federal law does not in any way acknowledge legal use of marijuana, which the federal gun laws say if you are a user of illegal drugs, you cannot possess or purchase a firearm. So it's a very tricky area, and I don't have any bright line answer for you, or can I give you the advice on what to do either. So.
Is there anything that'll kick it out when you check it on your form? Because I recently bought one, and I don't use the marijuana, but they do because you can go in there Sunday night at 5 minutes before they close and buy a gun, and a lot of times you'll get checked, back through the checks immediately, upon application.
Right, so the National Instant Check System is a combination of multiple background check systems. But what we're talking about is the form you fill out. So even if you fill out that form honestly and you say, yes, I use marijuana, but here's my card because I use it legally in Michigan, the federal government doesn't regard that to be legal.
Yeah, but have you known of any being rejected because they have checked the box?
I have, yes. I mean, it has happened. I don't know the details or what happened of that because a lawyer, their own lawyer, would have to sort of do that.
In this state or other states?
I've heard of it in other states, and I've heard of it pretty widespread. It's a pretty big issue, a topic of conversation in states like Michigan, Colorado, and so forth. But I don't know any real legal details on what their next step is. I just know from our perspective, we know that there needs to be some sort of rectification of the two laws because they are incompatible. But I don't have any indication as to when that might happen or what the process might be. Would there be a comment period or, it's a regulatory thing, a legislative thing? I don't know. So.
Do you think Vice President Pence and President Trump attending your NRA convention will give your organization a little boost?
They've attended, Trump has attended the last 3 years. Our members love it, they enjoy it. He's been a supporter of the organization, and our membership is continuing to grow. I think there's a lot of stuff, people read things and just believe it now, right? People see something on the internet and they're like, oh, did you see that? And that's sort of it's good and bad. Everyone has has so much information now about all these issues, which they didn't have before. Unfortunately, everyone just kind of believes what they read, and then they leave it at that. So it's a difficult thing to navigate with that, but I can say that our members will be very excited. We have 80,000 people expected to show up in Indianapolis next week. Our annual meetings are so much fun, and in fact, I brought little flyers back there if anyone's interested, if you plan on making a trip with some of the information on it. But it will be great. Our members will certainly welcome both of them. Yes, ma'am.
I gotta say, we've attended the annual meetings.
Oh,
that is a picnic and a half. Oh my gosh, it's such a wonderful event, and it's just like a PTA meeting. There's families and there's, oh my gosh, the various everything.
Yeah.
It's worth the trip.
And so which one did you attend recently?
Pittsburgh and oh crap, help me out here.
Nashville?
Nashville,
yeah. Yeah, well,
I didn't have Trump Heston there.
Oh.
That was his whole day.
Yeah, that was, I'll tell you, if you get an opportunity, the annual meeting is just seminars and 15 plus acres of guns and gear. Alan Jackson is doing concerts, Ted Nugent's there. It's free, if you remember, everything is free. It's just firearms, freedom, and fellowship, and it's just a super fun weekend. And it's in Indianapolis, which I'm excited about because we've been out in Texas, and I like when it's in the Midwest, because then my folks all are going to be there. So if you get a chance, it is just such a fun weekend to join us. So, yes, sir.
One reason she really liked to go to the NRA meeting was the meeting that Charlton Heston got elected president.
Right.
She got to shake his hand. He was walking through the
Oh, yeah. For me, it was always, I can't be a fangirl, but it was always before, it was Tom Selleck. I always wanted to see Magnum PI. He was on our board for a very long time, but yeah, it's fun. All the most fun celebrities come out, they do all sorts of events and seminars, you get to see them at dinner. The whole town is just infiltrated with, like I said, we're expecting 80,000 NRA members in one city for the weekend, so yeah, it's a lot of fun. So.
Was the eliminating bump stocks federal or state? Federal, right?
It was federal, so they tried at the state level. The federal side was a bump stock ban. The NRA did not, we opposed a ban on that. We just don't think the effect of banning anything. We find it to be dangerous. To ban anything, it opens the door to ban other things. So we did not support the ban on bump stocks. Quite frankly, a lot of folks had no idea what they were until that day. But
maybe you better explain it to people here. Maybe they don't know either.
Well, so the unfortunate Las Vegas massacre, the gunman used a bump stock, and essentially what it does is it's a component, accessory to a firearm that allows it to fire at a more rapid pace. And like I said, I think before that night, nobody knew or had heard of one. Unfortunately, after such a tragic event, the next day, Congress was already talking about banning bump stocks, but also banning a lot of other things. It became a very critical and strategic legislative time because we understood that, let's be honest, in our history, our Congress tends to act right after a national tragedy, and we have to be very careful. We want to keep people safe. We want to do the right thing. We want to focus on solutions, but they were focused on this. So, unfortunately, and luckily, we were able to sort of fend off a legislative effort, but unfortunately it got bumped to a regulatory, and so through, again, the regulatory field, it was then, they were banned through regulation. We actually filed a comment with the ETF against the bump stock ban. We also asked for an amnesty period because the people that own them bought them in good faith, and they were being told they had to destroy them. And it's an accessory, essentially. And the ATF, on 3 occasions, had ruled that they were legal. So we couldn't understand, but that's kind of where it was. So.
Well, there was one company that called up on a radio station that manufactured bump stocks, and they said that they had just destroyed 70,000 bump stocks in their inventory. And they're looking, and they're suing the federal government for compensation for the loss of, because that was 40% of their business, they said.
Yeah, the Supreme Court case, they did not make it to the Supreme Court, so there were some lawsuits. They did not, the Supreme Court denied review. I'm sure they will appeal, but that's kind of where they are for now. So, any other questions about the legislation?
One more thing on those bump stocks. I understand that the military has a device that can pinpoint where rapid fire is coming from and swing the gun around and shoot right at it. If they had one of those devices at that big open air casino, which they didn't think they needed, but if they did in the future have one of those, some guy from a hotel room that's, you know, thousands of hotel rooms around the area, as soon as the guy opens fire, that thing locks onto it and shoots at it and puts them out of commission. So that's one of the ways we might want to look at defending ourselves against these maniacs that are going to keep on doing this forever and ever.
There's one sold police department.
That's one place where this country is really weak. You don't know anything about defending ourselves. We're going to have wild, evil people around. Our schools, what they're doing is a joke.
Right. Well, yeah.
I got DVDs. I give the sheriff's department, I give our senator, and this expert said, once you're dealing with something weird in the school, it's too late. You
Well,
get them before they get into the school.
Yeah.
Which my son's school has.
Well, that's a good thing to bring up. I mean, first and foremost, we obviously cannot legislate evil. It will exist, it will continue to exist. We can't militarize our entire community because we're waiting for something to happen. I know that's again, we have to be prepared to have some uncomfortable conversations. But in regards to the schools, I do want to mention something. The NRA implemented what's called the NRA School Shield Program, and I remember just vividly the minutes and the days following Sandy Hook was just a sad moment in history for every American. And I know that very immediately after that, working at NRA, we were all called down to the auditorium. And Asa Hutchinson was there, and there were folks involved with Navy SEALs and former FBI agents and Secret Service. And we were all, what's going on? And immediately the NRA, and this is how the NRA, this is where we are. We're not mental health professionals, okay? We don't know how to solve that issue, but we know there needs to be a conversation. But we also know that in our country, we protect our banks, our sports stadiums, better than we do our schools. And the NRA is the preeminent trainer of people for self-defense. And one thing that we're lacking is the ability to train people how to defend our schools. Now, the NRA, contrary to what you hear, is the NRA is not going around saying, put guns in schools, all teachers should be armed. That's not ever what we said. But there are school districts who have the authority to say, we want armed resource officers. Or we have a couple teachers who are former military or law enforcement who they can carry and so forth. And so our thought was this. Those folks need to be trained differently than any other way. And just having your CPL or running a couple classes here, and it doesn't mean you're prepared to defend a school. So a couple things that the NRA School Shield does. It prepares and trains very specifically for school situations. It's grant funded, so we're actually able to provide those resources through grants for free. If people decide in their community to have armed resources for schools, we will train them very specifically. But also importantly, we provide a service where experts in the field will come out to the schools and assess all of them, not with use of firearms, but every part of that school and the weak spots and where they need to be better and where they need to do things. But we have to start thinking about how do we defend our schools because we're there. And it may be uncomfortable for people to say that, well, it's a shame that we're in this, that's how the country is now. Well, that's where we are, and we have to have conversations about the best way to keep children safe, and that's going to include a lot of different avenues and discussions, but we want to be part of that discussion and part of that solution, so. Yes, ma'am.
What is the most effective way to actually reach our legislators? Writing a letter is one thing, and I think it takes weeks and months to get to them. Is it a telephone call? Is it email? What is the best way to make an impact?
So a couple ways. So in talking with a lot of legislators, and they'll kind of, I think, kind of tell you the secrets here, is that, so sometimes we will send out alerts to say, click this button and send a pre-written letter through email. And a lot of folks wonder, is that really going to do anything? Well, sometimes by volume alone, it gets their attention. So no, they're not gonna read your message and see your name, but they're gonna know that their mailbox is jammed full and their phone lines are filled with people calling about a bill. So that volume is important. But one of the most important things you can do, especially in today's age where things are very impersonal, everything's over email and stuff, is go to Lansing, make an appointment, or in your district, and shake their hand, look them in the eye, and have a conversation with them as a voting constituent. So one of the things I always say, and I've spent a lot of this session at different capitals with legislators, where people are making appointments to see them and say, I'm a voting constituent in your district. I want to know where you stand on this and have a discussion about it. And there's a lot of tips and tricks to it. Is you want to really focus on one particular bill or one area and how that applies to you. I think one of the most important things you can do is if you have a concern about an area and you're talking with your legislator is stick with one particular area, that particular bill, how it affects you as a citizen in your district or as a voting constituent, and have that conversation. They tend to like focused stuff, not just overall, I'm worried about this, and this. So that's a really good effort too. Writing letters is always important. One thing I like to mention is, even though not many folks read newspapers as much anymore, letters to the editor are very important because you can post them online in social media, but here's the thing is, NRA could write letters in newspapers and get columns, but people want to hear from their own fellow citizens. So when they see something posted that was in the newspaper locally by one of their citizens, that goes a lot further than something that the girl from the NRA wrote or submitted to a paper. So I always encourage folks to continually write letters to the editor and post them online so that people can see who you are, where you live, and that's how you reach your community, but also your legislators are going to see that as well. That somebody in my district had a letter in the newspaper, they posted it online, everyone can see where they're from, they're in my district, and they may even reach out to you as well. So I think there's a lot of different ways to go about it, but I find that right before a bill is going to be voted on, volume is key. But in the meantime, making an appointment to actually meet with your lawmaker and talk specifically about a bill is one of the best ways to go.
We have one question here.
Sure.
I just want to back up. There is information available out there. You don't have to start looking. Colonel Croson is one of the guys that does it. It goes year round, going to schools, churches. In fact, churches are the most dangerous by far. It's available, we'll tell you. I gave it to our congressman, I gave it to our sheriffs around here. It's all going down the road right now.
Right. Well, it's interesting you say about the churches. I have seen a couple sheriffs, and again, they're not all going to do everything you want them to do, but it doesn't mean you stop asking. But I have seen some local sheriffs put together and host self-defense and firearm courses at churches so that they're in the specific church and they can advise on the setup and logistics of the church, where to carry and so forth. So there are some catching on. It's not going to be a big build, I think, as everyone would want. But there are some sheriffs out there that I think are willing to do training specifically about church carry, or even with some of their officers on how to deal with armed citizens is also a big one as well. But it is a very important thing to keep talking about and educating folks that we need our community leaders to be in on having the discussions about how to keep us safe and utilizing the community resources that are prepared to do it. So,
It's on.
Many years ago, I wrote a letter to the editor here in Manistee. I sent a copy to Ludington, and Ludington was word for word. Manistee, I hardly recognized it was my letter. So is this something that happens at newspapers where they change a word or two from I did to I didn't, things like this? Is this a problem?
Something that would significantly change the direction of the letter, I have not heard. But that's why I've not heard. But that sounds pretty severe, what happened to you. But what's nice about social media is you can post your own letter. You'd say, I've submitted this letter to the Ludington, and then you have it on your site, or you've shared it with your friends, and you see exactly what it is that you actually submitted to the paper. So if they do print it, you can show. But yeah, I had not heard of something quite as severe as that. So yeah.
One more quick question. Now, the NRA Second Amendment's being attacked from all over the place. What would you consider maybe going forward for us to look out for as some of the biggest problems you may see?
I think, one of the biggest issues I think we're having, and this is a very broad stroke, but I think we're not doing a very good job utilizing and engaging our young people in this issue. I think that unfortunately, one of the most dangerous things is that we as a community have not learned to do social media very well. We haven't, we're kind of pretty old-fashioned, I think, but we're going to have to get uncomfortable to get outside our box and start bringing people in. And I think that is one of the most important things we can do, is engage young people in it. And the way we do it is a couple different ways. I've just spent the last couple weeks, I did an NRAU at Oakland University, Michigan State University, and Western. And I think to be a good steward of the Second Amendment, we've got to take opportunities to take young people shooting. That's one of the best ways to get them into the fold before they understand the politics of it, the philosophical issues. Talk to young people, engage them on these Second Amendment issues, get them involved in hunting, shooting. The NRA has collegiate programs that we run. And just so you guys know, we have at Western Michigan, we have an NRA Collegiate Coalition. These kids are phenomenal. They hold weekly meetings on Second Amendment gun-related topics. They have the chief of police come in to talk about campus carry. They have the president of the university come to their meeting. So I think we really need to engage young folks. It's one thing to sit at your gun club and talk about these issues with your friends, or go to your local meetings and we're all like, preaching to the choir. I think we really need to be better at spreading the word outside of our own little community of who we know are supporters of this. So, and I think I said, get outside of your groups, get outside of your gun clubs, get outside of your typical folks and start talking to people and giving them an opportunity to know what the NRA is about. I think is one of the most important things we can do right now.
Yeah, don't expect the newspapers to do it for you.
Well, they never have, and they never will, but like I said, we have at our disposal social media, whether we like it or not. I know for the longest time, I don't own a computer, I don't have anything to do with it. That's fine, but we've lost this battle in getting young people in that way. And so I think going outside your comfort zone, whether you like it or not, will do an incredible service to the cause. We have so many. If you ask me about what issue is most important or most dangerous, there are so many. But I think eliminating due process, and we were just talking about it earlier, that I was talking with some folks, is that the starting point for young people these days, they don't know anything about history. They have no understanding of the Revolutionary War, our Constitution. If you tell them about the Bill of Rights, they think the Second Amendment's outdated and it doesn't apply anymore. These are all shocking, and a lot of it's not their fault. We all like to make fun of millennials, it's hilarious, but it's not their fault. It's their parents, it's their teachers. And so we have to take on the responsibility rather than just making fun of them, which is easy to do, especially when you have one in Congress who is unbelievable. Every day that Cortez, old lady, she drives me nuts. But she's considered a millennial, and we're getting a front row seat as to what our Congress could possibly look like if we don't start passing down and being good stewards of the Second Amendment and the Constitution. And so, like I said, I can't say one particular issue because there are so many that will threaten our right, but if they don't have a baseline appreciation for our nation, as unique as it is with the Constitution we have, we aren't going to get very far. So that's kind of where I would say we need to do a better job. So thank you all so much for your attention and the invitation. It's been great chatting with y'all. Thanks.
Does anybody else have anything for the group? If not, oh, sure.
On June 7th, Friday night, here at the bungalow, is the Manistee County Republicans annual dinner. And our guest speaker is going to be Donna, I gotta remember how to say her name, Tice. And she is the state senator, and she is in charge of the banking and insurance committee. So she's the one that's dealing with all the no-fault malarkey. So she's going to be here to talk about that, so put that on your calendars.
Okay, next month we have Diane Schillenbeck from Women for Trump. No one else has anything. Thank you for coming. We'll hopefully see you next month.